This year has been a year in which we have all had to confront pain and loss and death. And so we wondered, what happens when we die? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Face to Face. Hey, Rabbi Litwak, how you doing?
Rabbi David, nice to see you alive and well.
Alive and well. I was just thinking, it's sort of funny that we're about 300 meters from one another, and yet this is how we meet every Thursday.
Indeed.
Yeah. So this year, I think so many of us have had to confront, if not death itself, what we believe, what we imagine about what happens when we die. And, the beautiful thing for me about Jewish beliefs of the afterlife is that there are so many. There's such a rich collection of texts and beliefs and possibilities. And so for me, there is no one, this is what Jews believe. There's a little bit, it's kind of a smorgasbord. But there's also, I think, a question about to what extent are these beliefs important and central to who we are as Jews. And I have a sense, just from what you said before we got on, that you and I actually differ there. So do you think about what happens when we die? Is that an important part of your theology?
It is not. Look, like you said, I think there are some Jews who believe in an afterlife, and we'll talk about what that means. Some Jews don't. The Torah itself makes no mention of what happens after death, only that we will join our ancestors. But look, that could mean that we get buried as much as joining them in some other place. A belief in the afterlife is not it's not central to my Jewish identity. I tend to think about death as the demise of our physical being. I don't put a lot of stock in the idea of an everlasting survival of the spirit or some sort of system of delayed reward or punishment for what I did in this world. I'm much more comfortable with the idea of an afterlife that continues right here where I have spent my life, that I live on in my deeds and the ripple effect that they have spread out into the world. And I think that we continue in the blessing of memories in the descendants who bear our name, or in the quirky mannerisms that we pass along to the next generation.
So that's fascinating to me, because to me, the idea of something more than just living on in memory or living on in deed is actually quite important. I remember I struggled with the question of, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but does the soul, for me, does the soul exist as an entity, or does it, when someone dies, become a part of the whole, and God, or the whole, or the oneness? And for me, the idea that the soul actually does exist as a unique entity was really important. And it was important because when I die, I don't really care what happens to me. But for other people that I love, it's important to me, as someone who is remaining, to still be able to relate to them, to imagine them, to communicate with them, to think of them, to envision them. And I have a hard time doing that if the soul doesn't, it continue to exist as an entity. I understand also that none of what I'm saying makes any sense scientifically. I mean, I'm not naive to that, but it's all about faith, right?
Right.
this
Nobody's come back to tell us, so
exact right. And that's the beautiful thing, right? No one will ever tell me I'm wrong. But so for you, it's enough that you don't need that sort of tangible, even though it's not tangible, soul in the after. It's for you memory and all of that is
yeah. Look,
enough.
maybe that is my definition
Yeah.
of soul. And let's okay. So we can put aside my
Yeah.
idea and recognize that even though I don't necessarily believe I don't spend a lot of time thinking about this. I tend to be this worldly, and I think Judaism is very much focused on this world. With that said, Judaism has a very rich body of views of the afterlife that largely developed post biblically and have radically changed over the centuries. We can look at when I said the Torah doesn't have it, I didn't say the Bible, because you can go into Ezekiel and you've got that famous passage from the 37th chapter of Ezekiel, the
Is that the
vision of the
dry
dry
bones?
bones.
Yeah.
You know, behold, I will cause you to come up out of your graves and bring you to the land of Israel. That there is that's definitively an idea of resurrection of the dead. You have
And it's
Maimonides.
and a very physical. I mean that
Oh
there's
yeah,
also there's sort of is
yeah.
there a spiritual resurrection, but that's a Ezekiel's vision is a physical, the body's getting up, which
Mm-hmm.
doesn't sound very Jewish.
No, I don't think it. Well, it's hard to say whether it's not Jewish because it's become Jewish, and we should like take a step back and understand different terms when it comes to the afterlife. So we're talking about resurrection, the idea of the an identical mind and body of the person who has died. As they were originally joined. Okay, and here I'm making a separation between soul and body, but as they are in me right now, I die. At some later point, resurrection is the coming to life again of that person, of me again. That's resurrection. All right, there is immortality. Immortality is the idea of the soul or mind surviving the death of the body. Okay, it gets separated, and there is where I think we spend a lot of time
Yes.
Jewishly. And then there's even kind of a third further piece, which is transmigration, the idea that the soul passes at death from the body of the person who's died straight into another body.
That's the same
Um,
as reincarnation, yes? Transmigration?
I don't. A reincarnation, yes, I think that's probably
I think they're probably
we
the same.
can. I'm sure that there's some distinction, but I don't make that distinction. So look, I think that, as I said, Judaism has a very rich body of views, and you've got think something like Ezekiel. You have Maimonides in the 12th century. One of his 13 articles
Right.
of faith is the belief in the afterlife, and even within our liturgy. You don't have to look any further than the Givurot, the second prayer in
Right.
the Amidah section, the middle section of every worship services, that describes God as Mechaye HaMetim, all right, the one who resurrects the dead, who brings life to the dead. Now, I will sidebar and say that the Reform movement rejected bodily resurrection a couple hundred years ago. Okay, and that prayer, we don't say Mechaye Hametim, we now say Mechaye Hakol, the one who's I'm
God
sneezing on the
bless
truth.
you.
Thank you. Instead of one who brings life to the dead, one who brings life to all, Mechaye Hakol, means that we can kind of skirt the idea of bodily resurrection. But you can go back to 1869 in the Philadelphia platform. You can go back to 1885 in the Pittsburgh platform of Reform Judaism. The absolute clear rejection of bodily resurrection.
I think a
So
lot of people are stunned. You know, ignorance is bliss, and so when those of us who daven regularly, I'm often very pleased that the tefillot are in Hebrew so that we don't know what we're saying, because I think if we did, a lot of us probably not just
might have
wouldn't
a
say
little
it
more
because we
trouble.
don't like going to shul, but we would intentionally not want to say it. And Mechaya Matim is one of those things. And people are shocked, I think, when they learn that 3 times a day, every day, we thank God for, whether in body from the traditional standpoint, or perhaps, giving life in a spiritual sense, in the Reform standpoint, giving life to everything, that we do believe in some sort of after life after death, whatever that might mean for you.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So let's, we might as well dive in and at least talk, whether I believe it or not, I get to teach it, what happens after we die. And I think it's a little hard to figure out which direction we want to go. But let's start with the idea that there is something happening around death, where there is a separation between the soul, okay, and the vessel that soul has been implanted in. Okay, that who are we at our essence is what we'll call soul, right? And that we live in a shell, a body that eventually wears out, right? And that is when we die. So what happens with the body? Well, we put it in the ground and it returns dust to dust. On the other hand, what happens with the soul? And that's the far more interesting question. And we can go several hundred years back in history where we start to, or even a couple thousand, where we start to have this question about what happens to us after we die. And I would say that we have that question because we don't want to countenance the idea that this is all that there is, that once I die, I'm done. Right? There's nothing of me that remains. Okay? The other reason that I think post-biblically we have a development of a rich tradition of afterlife is because we lived in very difficult times. And so we're going through pain and agony, and heck, we're in the Olympics, so pain, agony, and defeat. And that, thanks.
I remember
That's
that.
about as close to the sports analogies that I can make. But that at the end of the destruction of the first temple, there is this idea of can there be something better in the future, and will that help us live the difficult lives that we live in? And so you have Amos and Hosea and Isaiah all predicting something into the future.
And I also think it was in response to a real philosophical dilemma, which is you had these Jews who had thought that they had lived good Jewish lives. They thought they had done mitzvot, and they're walking around the temple, and it's destroyed.
What
and
happened?
You're saying, yeah, exactly. Like you told us, Torah, that if we did good, if we, follow mitzvot, it would rain at the right time. That tit for tat sort of, but I don't get it. And the rabbis, I think part of their response was not only that there's a better world or another world, but it's, you misunderstood. We didn't mean that you'd be rewarded or punished now, right? We meant it would come in the future. And so that was really the birth of this whole sense of, which is stunning, by the way, to me, because You were talking before about body and soul and the nature of the two. When we go back to Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava in the Garden of Eden, Adam was a soulless being before God napach be'apav, blew the breath of life into Adam, and so the idea that it had to take until the rabbis to come along for us to really flesh out this soul idea feels a little strange, because it's there from the very beginning.
Well, okay.
No?
Yes, I'm just not sure that the breath of life, and let's recognize, all right, neshama, all right, and that breath and soul, the words in Hebrew are linked. So I get it.
Nefesh, yeah.
I'm just not sure that. I'm not sure that. I think we're projecting back an idea and
no, that's
finding
fair.
it
That's
versus it necessarily being there at the beginning. On the other hand, look, we get to the rabbinic period, and it's absolutely clear. You got in a vote, Olam Hazeh, this world is like a vestibule to Olam Haba, the world to come.
By the way, a quick thing about Olam Haba, which I remember learning years ago. Olam Haba, we commonly translate as the world to come. But the words Olam Haba actually mean the world that is coming. Haba is an active verb. It doesn't necessarily mean that will come. So that is to say that the world that is coming is in the process of coming right now. It's not in time that it will be later. It is perhaps in perception or whatever. I just want to share with you, Rabbi, that a dear friend of ours wanted to share his thoughts, and he says that it's a refreshing topic, that he feels that God blows the spirit that we have into our bodies, and that when we pass on, our soul returns to the spiritual world and the body returns to the earth. Is that sort of where you fall?
I think that's where I'm comfortable with that idea.
So then what happens to the soul then? So the soul
So let's talk about that, because over time that has that idea has developed. So I mean, the topic for today is what happens when I die, and from Kabbalistic sources, we get the idea that even 30 days before we die, that the soul begins, we'll call it a partial separation from the body, right? And then in the hours before one dies, there's further separation. Okay? And then at the moment of death, our soul leaves the body and meets its maker. Right?
Which is why I learned that's why we open a window when someone passes away, because the soul is leaving. And you want to allow it to depart. Right. Right. It's good to be able to laugh about this a little bit also.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's exactly right. Okay, but so that's at the moment of death. Right? And then the tradition says that for the first 3 days after death, the soul is a little confused. It believes it's going to re-enter the body in the same way as our idea that at night, right, God takes our soul, protects it, and then in the morning returns it back to us. Elohai neshama shenatata bi. God, the soul that you have given me is pure. And each morning we are resouled.
I've always thought of it like a rechargeable battery. It's like our iPhones, right? That every night God has to take our battery out, plug it in, charge it, and then if we're lucky, God puts it back in us and we're ready to go for another day.
Mm-hmm. So, so in those first 3 days, the soul is a little confused, thinking that it's going to re-enter the body, and so it stays closely attached to it. After 3 days, it ceases to try and re-enter the body, but it's still a little confused as to what it's supposed to be doing. And so during Shiva, that week following death and burial, the soul goes back and forth even from the grave to the Shiva house. Right? And then between Shiva and the 30-day period, end of Shloshim, the soul starts to rise to heaven, but is closely attached to the grave. And then between 30 days and the first yort site, the soul keeps going up to heaven, but still returns periodically to the grave. And then after 1 year, the soul stays in heaven, except for maybe a little part that remains connected to the world and to the body. That's one idea.
And so that then corresponds also to how we respond to death and the mourning practices
Of
that
course.
we
Yeah.
participate in.
And I think that those, from an academic standpoint, I think those kind of came together. I have to do a shout out to my very long-standing friend David Simon Baker, who I grew up with. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for joining us. And
What's with the
yes,
number 3? Yeah.
yeah. I look. I think three is a very common number in many traditions. That three is a number of strength. I mean, if you think about, what's a triangle, and uh, 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 a three-legged stool is more sturdy than. All right, he's got a
I
three-legged.
actually last year
Oh yeah, all right,
last year I had one of our teachers who's an artist make this for
yeah.
me. It's
Torah
a
Avodah
right.
Gimilut Chasadim.
Yes, I've got
Nice. The world
the
stands
world
on
there,
three things.
and then the
On
3 legs, Torah, Avodah, and Gimel Chasim. Yeah,
That
and
doesn't look
yeah,
very sturdy there, big
no,
guy.
it's not. I can't, they keep falling out.
All right, let's come back to
Sorry.
so uh, so now, all right, we have this idea of separation of body and soul, and that is, that's one thing that we can focus on, but kind of what happens next. Okay? And there's where the Olam Haba piece comes in, this world to come. And there are different concepts. In the Talmud, it says that the world to come is not like this world. In this world, this is a favorite text. You'll see exactly why in 1 second. That in this world, one has trouble to harvest grapes and press them and work them and make them into wine. But in the world to come, right, a person will bring a single grape, right, in a wagon or a ship. Okay, will store it in the corner of his house and draw on it, okay, with for enough wine to fill a like a vessel, all right, of wine. Like one, that the world to come is an easier place for us,
So
right?
I
That there's
again, I might be projecting here, Rabbi, but that's again bringing me back to Gan Eden, right? And the whole idea that before we were kicked out, everything was done for us. We didn't have to work, and then the punishment was in this world, you're going to have to work to make wine. It's not
right.
going to be easy.
Versus, and you couldn't have set me up. Sometimes we prepare and sometimes we don't prepare, folks. But this one, he set me up beautifully. I think that there are really kind of three. There are more, but I would say three in the time that we have, concepts of Olam Haba. The last one is Gan Eden, which I'll get to. The first two are not so fun. Okay, one that we call Sheol. Sheol is some form of a pit in the ground. It's described as beneath the waters, described as being in a dark place, that it torments people, and we have in biblical literature Jacob saying, about Benjamin, my son won't go down with you, won't go down to Egypt with me or with all of you, because his brother, right, Joseph, is dead. He thinks Joseph is dead, and only he, Benjamin, is left. All right, and if harm befalls him, all right, then you will bring down my hairs, my gray hairs, in sorrow into Sheol. Okay, that this is somehow a place that is lower down. Okay, and that when we die, that somehow we go to this dark, scary place. Okay, the other one, similar, is the concept of Gehinnom, Gehenna. Okay, now where does Gehenna come from? Where does Gehinnom come from? It's actually a place. Okay? It's a place in Jerusalem. You can actually go there. Okay? In fact, most people go there in some way, shape, or form because it is the valley that runs just to the side, one of the sides of the old city of Jerusalem. What
Don't
is
they have
called?
great concerts there? Isn't there a great?
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed, Sultan's Pool. Okay, Guy Ben Hinnom, the valley of the son of Hinnom. Guy Ben Hinnom, Gehinnom, okay, was a place when this was a Jebusite city, okay, when Jerusalem, before it became Jerusalem, was a place of human sacrifice. Okay? And so this is not such a fun place to go. Gehinnom is this place of judgment for the first 12 months after death. Okay? The third concept is the one that you mentioned, which is Gan Eden. That's the one that we all hope for, which is this lavish place where the righteous will sit in beautifully spread tables, golden tables, according to the Talmud, on stools of gold. There's another spot in the Talmud that talks about it, and participate in these lavish banquets, that things are provided for us. And they say that there are three groups on the day of judgment. Okay, that when one goes through judgment, we could talk about that at a different time. All right, one pile is thoroughly righteous, the other part is thoroughly wicked, all right, and one intermediary.
The rest of us.
Yeah. And the second and the third, okay, the thoroughly wicked and the intermediate, they are doomed to Gehinnom. The second, the thoroughly wicked, are going to remain in Gehinnom. All right, and the third, the ones that are in the immediate, will somehow rise back up. All right, and the ones who are thoroughly righteous will eventually end up in Gan Eden.
And there's a beautiful teaching that I remember about why we only say Kaddish for our parents for 11 months. And that's because, just the teaching that I learned, that because the Beinonim, the in-betweeners, who maybe need a little repair to their soul, they haven't been perfect tzaddikim because they reside in Gehinnom for 12 months before they rise up, if you will, that we don't want to imagine that our parents are in that category. We want to imagine that our parents are purely righteous. And so we don't say Kaddish for 12 months because we don't even want to associate our parents with 12 months, which is connected to this idea of the Beinonim, the in-betweeners, being in Gehinnom. Wow. And so we only say it for 11 months because the assumption is our parents are already in heaven and they made it there because they were purely righteous. Can I ask you a question? Mordechai gave a long comment here, but it's the last sentence that I want to ask you about. The reason he says why some people ask at an early life, others a later time, is because we're given a set time to complete our mission. Do you have in your theology or philosophy of this, do you imagine that when a person dies is somehow scripted,
No,
or you don't? Okay.
no, I respect differences of opinion on that, but I don't believe that Jewish tradition um, has that. Jewish tradition, there's far richer tradition of tshuva, of repentance and return, that allows us to hopefully continue. I just refuse to believe that God puts people on the earth with only X amount of time. God puts us on and says, your time is limited, okay? But it's not God who's pulling the strings for me. And so um, I think that we all have the opportunity to extend our lives by doing things that are right. That doesn't mean that we're not going to get hit by a bus, right? But that the extension of our lives, and this is where we'll circle back and finish, is for me the extension of life is in the good deeds that we do that will continue on beyond our physical being. Okay? That I'm hoping that the work that I do with young people, with older, will get passed on, and the ripple effect of my stone dropping in the water will be one that goes on further.
I don't, you may have already answered this, but I just had one final question, because it's easy for me to get lost in the sort of the philosophical arguments or questions about what happens when we die. But at the end of the day, I think what most of us are looking for when we struggle with these questions is where we can find comfort. And I'm wondering, is there one particular teaching around what happens when we die from Judaism or from your own life that has brought you comfort?
Um, Around.
I can give you one if you want to
I mean,
think.
let's hear yours. I don't need to.
So
Why does it have to always be me?
no, okay. So I was sitting shiva for a family member, a young child, and I was visited by a black hat, a dear friend who's a black hat Haredi guy. And he came in, I'll never forget this, we're sitting in our basement, and he told this story of a couple, a prince and a princess, or king and a queen, whatever, who desperately wanted a child. They wanted a child. They prayed, they prayed, they prayed. They finally were given a child. And for the first 2 years, you know this story apparently, and for the first 2 years, the child was weaned by a what do you call it?
Wet nurse.
A wet nurse, thank you. Because, this is the king and the queen. And then this child went on, it lived a long life, it grew up, it was kind, it was wonderful, da 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 da. Another couple, very poor, wanted a child, desperately prayed, 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 prayed. They were finally blessed with a child. They just wouldn't let this baby out of their sight, right? Every minute of every day, they of course couldn't afford a wet nurse, and they cared for it. And then after 2 years, it died. And they went to the rabbi. They said, I don't get it. Like, this is all we prayed for. And the rabbi said to them that the soul of your child was the soul of that other child, of the king and the queen. And there was only one thing. This is sort of getting back to what Mordechai said before about finishing our task. There was only one thing that it had not completed. It was kind, it was joyful, it was wise, it was the only thing it was lacking was to be raised by its parents for the first 2 years of its life, to be weaned by its mother and father. And you did that. You gave that gift to this soul, and it was ready. It was complete. It was ready to go. And my wife hated that story, and I loved it.
I can understand why. I can understand on both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just very comforting to me. This idea that, okay, my loved one's life was in some way complete. Their soul was in some way complete. It was very, very comforting to me.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea that you have a complete life. I just don't think that you come in necessarily with the, you know, you're only that.
An expiration date. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 So that takes the free will away, and I think that is such a crucial part of Jewish life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. So I guess we'll just leave everyone with wishing everyone comfort in whatever you believe, because there's enough beliefs to go around. Whatever brings you comfort, hold on to it, because as Rabbi, as you said before, no one's ever going to prove you wrong. So there's no right. There is only what brings us comfort. And
long life to all of you.
And long life to Ad Me'av Esrim, until 120. Rabbi, just remind me, are you going out of town in 2 weeks? I know I'm going to be. I don't know if we're continuing to do this over the summer. Are we taking a break?
I think we finish. I think this is it for. We're taking a little break, and then we'll be back later. We'll keep everybody informed.
Please God. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming today, Rabbi, and thank you all for watching. Thank you, Mordechai.
And thank you for thank you for all of your comments. We really appreciate it.
Yes, that's the best when we get comments. So listen, everyone, Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Comfort, long life, and we'll see you next time on Face to Face. That was fun. Thank you so much.